And this happens in all spheres of our lives. Sometimes we make mistakes at work. Sometimes we hurt people unintentionally, sometimes even intentionally by the things that we say. And sometimes we disappoint God. And because we all mess up, we like to start over, to turn our backs on the past, to look forward and to hope that this time around, things are going to be different and things are going to be better. January is known as the month of new beginnings. Why? Because it's the start. It's the start of a new year. Statistics tell us that January is the month where people attempt to make more change in their lives than any other time of the year. It has to do with the close of an old year and the beginning of a new one. It's a time when we try to start new things. It's also a time when the vast majority of people run headlong into failure and disappointment. If down the track, all of their plans and their New Year's resolutions that they had set aside and were going to do, if they start to fall apart. As one year closes and a new one begins, we feel the necessity to start things and to make changes in our lives. When Isaiah was writing to God's people in captivity in Babylon, he said this: Mine is slightly different. It says, "Do not remember the former things, nor consider the things of old. Behold, I will do new things. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I will even make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." And it says, streams in the wasteland. What a great God we have, a God of hope and a God of glory. I like one of the other translations that I read recently. It was very blunt and down to earth, and it said, "Forget about what has happened and don't keep going over old history." Do we do that? Do we keep churning things over, remembering things that somebody said to me a while ago, and when I see that person, that's the first thing that comes to my mind? We are told to forget about what has happened and don't keep going over old history. This advice is very relevant for us today. As we start a new year and prepare for the year ahead, most of us want some sort of a change. And think about all the changes that can come for each of us. Some of us are making preparation to change jobs, maybe start new courses at university, making commitments to work less hours and maybe spend more time with our family at home. Some people are even making a commitment to change the way they look or shift houses, moving out of home and becoming independent, or maybe even shifting churches. There are so many ways that we can make changes in our lives, but change is good. God was aware that we all need new beginnings. In fact, he granted that for us in Jesus. So let's have a look at 2 Corinthians 5 and 17. And it says this: "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new." Very important. Old things have become new. Let's put the past behind us. But when we make all these plans for new things, sometimes they don't always go to plan. Our best intentions can fall flat. Have you ever had that happen? Start off with all these great hopes and aspirations at the beginning of the year, and not long into the year, things start to fall flat. Maybe opportunities that we were trying to put in place don't work out quite the way we had expected. Maybe the path of our life that is taking is not quite what we had wanted or what we had expected for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with wanting something better, is there? Shouldn't we all want something better? Wanting something better for your life or wanting to make changes. But there also comes a point when we need to stop. Stop and look at our life and try and see God's leading in what has happened to our lives. And we need to ask ourselves a very important question. What does God want me to do with the situation I find myself in? Let me ask you that once more. What does God want me to do with the situation I find myself in? Not that long ago, we were studying about Job. Job is probably my favourite character in the Bible. I love the stories of him. I love his strength and his wisdom. And I find him incredibly inspirational. He went through disillusionment, uncertainty, fear, heartache, anguish. They were just a few of the emotions that he experienced during the turmoils of his life. And yet, through all of that, he held on really fast to God. He was secure in the knowledge that although he did not understand why these things were happening to him, he knew that God was in control, that God loved him, and God was always going to look after him. This knowledge and this incredible relationship that Job had with God still did not stop Job from asking questions and wishing that his life had been different. And also even cut short at birth when he was going through an awful time in his life. But it did provide him with the hope and comfort that no man or evil entity could take away. He knew that regardless of anything that happened to him, past or present, God loved him. You know, I do not believe that my God of love plans for bad things to happen. But bad things do happen to each of us throughout our lives. And we can all think back when things have saddened us, made us unhappy, and we would like to have changed them if we could. But I do believe that the God I love can direct each of us to make the best of whatever a bad situation has come our way. There's a story about a donkey who fell down a well. The story is entitled Never Give Up. And the story is told about a farmer who had this donkey, and he'd had it for many, many years. And it worked hard on his farm, did all the pulling and ploughing for him, and it was a loved donkey. But one day it stumbled across a well and it fell in. And as hard as he bleated, he couldn't make anybody hear him. And finally, as the farmer was getting ready for the end of the day, he realised the donkey was missing, and he went looking for him, and he heard him crying. And he went and he found the donkey, and try as he may, he could not get that donkey out, could not get it out of the well. So he didn't know what to do. And then he thought long and hard about it, and he thought, well, the donkey's old. This well needs to be filled in. I'm just going to call my neighbours and talk to them, and I think we'll fill in the well. So he asked his neighbours to come by, and they all grabbed a shovel and they began to shovel the dirt into the well. And as you can imagine, the donkey was horrified. He was scared and he cried even louder. But there was nothing they could do. They couldn't reach him, he was too far down. So they thought this was the best for him. So eventually the donkeys stopped bleating and they were shovelling the dirt away. Shovel load upon shovel load would drop down on that poor donkey, and the farmer finally looked down at the well, but he was astonished at what he saw. With every shovel of dirt that fell on his back, the donkey was doing something amazing. He would shake it off. He would take a step up and he'd wait for the next one to come. As the farmer's neighbours continued to shovel dirt on top of the animal, he would shake it off and step up again. So pretty soon, everyone was amazed as the donkey stepped out over the edge of the well, shook off the dirt and trotted off. So what's the moral of the story? Life is going to shovel dirt on you. It really is. All kinds of dirt. The trick is not to get bogged down in it. We can get out of the deepest wells not by stopping, but by never giving up. Shake it off and step up. At the age of 41, I did not expect to find myself a widow with 3 young children. My husband of 20 years and my best friend had succumbed to a second bout of cancer that he couldn't fight. The first bout of cancer, surgery presented with complications 2 days after he had it. And he ended up going back to surgery for what they thought was sepsis. We had no idea what was going on, but he was very sick. And so he went back to hospital and they attempted to try and correct whatever the problem was. They weren't too sure what was going on. They ended up transferring him from the hospital he was in to the Royal Brisbane Hospital, where he spent 11 weeks in intensive care. He spent months in rehab, learning to walk again and to rebuild the muscles that had withered quickly from the lack of use. The 11 weeks intensive care, 7 of which he was ventilated. He was very unwell. And in that time, unfortunately, he developed ARDS, which is a respiratory disorder which causes water to fill the little air sacs in your lungs and become quite, instead of your lungs being nice and soft, they became quite solid. And their only way of dealing with that is to try and push air into your lungs. And as you know, we all need air to breathe, so they were trying very hard to keep him alive. As the ARDS got worse, the pressure had to be increased. And I got a call late one night saying that they had blown 2 holes in the base of his lungs and he wasn't expected to live. But my husband was a fighter. Back to surgery. They repaired his lungs. He had 8 chest drains put in. And after this 11 weeks in intensive care, he gradually came around again. He spent many more months in rehab and he eventually learnt to walk again because his muscles had completely wasted after being in hospital unconscious for so long. What was a 4-day planned hospital admission turned to 8 months. And his survival was nothing short of a miracle. The ICU doctors and nurses couldn't believe that he had survived this. My husband was a good cook. He loved cooking, but I often knew when I came home through the week, if he had got home before me and I could smell the aromas of cooking, I knew that he'd probably had a bad day at work because that was his stress relief. And he had promised the doctors and nurses at the ICU at the Royal Brisbane, I'll be back with a Christmas cake. And he was. They were very surprised when he walked through the doors at the ICU at the end of that year with a Christmas cake for them all. God had been wonderful to bring him back to us and to make our little family whole again. But 2 years later, we found ourselves back at hospital with a less hopeful situation. And I struggled this time to understand, why would God give but then take back? It didn't make sense to me. Has that ever happened to you? That you think you're on top of something and then suddenly it doesn't quite go to plan? But you know, I have very wise parents, and for those of you that knew my mum and dad here, they were always very approachable and always full of wisdom. And my mum said to me, Kim, you need to look for the good in everything that happens to you. And I can tell you, when you're going through a storm in your life, it's not always easy to look for the good, is it? But now, almost 24 years later, I can see God's hand in that journey. I no longer see God as giving back and then taking away, but instead I see that he gave us amazing 2 extra years of life. Time that we were able to watch our kids together grow up a little bit more. You know, not everybody is this lucky. We've heard this week of sudden tragedies, young kids surfing, taken by sharks, people dying on road accidents and things like that. Some people don't have that opportunity of that extra time. So it's important that we enjoy and feel blessed with what we have been given and look for the good in it. I was reminded this Christmas of a family several Christmases ago here in Brisbane whose son on Christmas Eve said, "Mum, I want to go out and look at the Christmas lights." And his parents said, "Oh, you know, it's getting a bit late." And he said, "Oh, they're all going to be taken down soon." So they said, "Okay, we will let you go out. Go on your bike, but stay on the footpath." So he went and looked out at the Christmas lights and he was having a great time. But on his way home, crossing a major road, he was hit and killed. I watched the story on the news and how when the people were coming out of the police station, the reporters approached them. And I was absolutely amazed at the parents. The family had every right to ask why. They had every right to be angry and resentful of the drunk driver that had taken the life of this young child that night. But they weren't. Instead, they asked for forgiveness for the driver and to move forward. There's nothing they could do about what had happened, but they asked that we stop being angry where we don't need to be angry. Let's move forward. How can a person reach out in love when they are hurting so much? It's an amazing strength to be admired. You know, when Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane and feeling the weight of the sinful world on his shoulders, he spoke to his Father and he asked if it was possible for that cup to pass from him. He knew what lay ahead. He knew the sadness and the burden that he was going to carry. It caused him deep anguish. Regardless, he was prepared to make that sacrifice. But as he lay there on the cross, hanging on the cross, he still reached out in love to the man beside him. Right to his last breath, he reached out and gave hope and encouragement for a better life to someone else. Christ never missed an opportunity to reach out to someone. You know, there's nowhere in the Bible, nowhere at all, where it promises us that our lives on this earth will be easygoing, free of pain, suffering, and happy all the time. If you're happy all the time, they tend to come looking for you, wanting to know what's going on. It's not right. None of us are happy all the time. There is nowhere where it says that we will live in peace together all the time in our homes and in our communities, in our churches. There is nowhere that it tells a mother who is anxious about the life that her teenage child chooses that this child will always make the right decisions. But what it does promise is that the God, our Father, will give us the strength we need to get through the trials that lie ahead. We have these promises. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. It tells us in Joshua 1 verse 9. It also says this in Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And I'm sorry if that's a little bit small to read, but in Philippians 4:19 it says, and my God will meet all your needs according to the riches of his glory in Jesus Christ. So what does this have to do with making New Year's resolutions and new beginnings? As I mentioned earlier, we're about to start a new year. One more day of this old year and it's gone. Everything that's happened can't be changed. It's a time for us now to focus on what is ahead, to feel a little bit more objectively about our lives and to make some decisions that may be life-changing. You know, we each have a choice in the way that we react to situations around us. We can choose to be the victim or the victor. The choice that we make, though, very much influences the equality and the meaningfulness of our life. But it also affects those around us, the people we love and the people that love and care for us. We should never forget that the choices we make don't just affect us, do they? They affect everyone around us. What an amazing example the family who lost their son that Christmas past set to those around them when the young man whose poor decisions resulted in the death of their son. They had every right to be angry and to lash out at God and also to lash out at the community. But they chose not to. They chose grace and forgiveness. They chose to offer forgiveness and love. The olive branch of love will heal and restore if we allow it in our lives. Like the donkey in the well, we can either choose to let the dirt bury us, or we can brush it off and use the experience to lift us up that little bit closer to God. You know, many years ago, I did my psychiatry nursing certificate, and I had a lecturer, Danny, his name was, and I was always in awe when I was listening to him. He had so much wisdom there. And he spoke to us about fight or flight. Now, it's something we've all heard of. It's the body's response to danger. So what sort of things happen to us if we experience danger? What is our body's reaction? Do you know? What's the first thing that you're aware of? You feel your heart come up into your throat, your heart start beating. Do you start to sweat? This is just a little example of some of the things that do happen to us. Our mouths get dry. We sometimes can't think clearly and we don't know what to do. But do you know also things like our digestion slows down? Blood is shunted from the major organs in our bodies to our muscles instead. And we have a change in various other nervous systems. And the reason why those things happen is that it gives our body a burst of energy and strength so that we can act immediately. This not only happens to us, but it also happens to animals as well. The fight or flight was named so that we could get away from danger, basically. When that perceived threat is gone, though, it's not very long before the body settles down and calms, and the functions all return to a relaxed response. The question I want to ask each of you is this: what does God want you to do when life throws you a curveball? When you think of the Bible characters, can you think of any examples in the Bible where flight was chosen over fight? Who's the first person that comes to mind? Jonah. Yeah, Jonah was the first person that came to my mind also. He did not want to go to Nineveh, not at all. He argued the point. He chose to flee rather than to do what God had asked. But God had other plans for Jonah. God wanted the people of Nineveh to be reached out to, and he was not prepared to let Jonah miss this opportunity. It wasn't just for the people of Nineveh, but God knew also that Jonah needed this experience as well. Jonah learnt some very important lessons on that journey. He learnt that regardless of what happens in our lives, God is always in control. While we each prepare to see an old year out and a new year come in, take a moment to look at your life. But before you start making all of these New Year's resolutions for the new things that you want, the things that you think may give your life more meaning, more value, take a few minutes to look around you and see if you already have something there that is meaningful and valuable in your life. Maybe you are struggling with it. Maybe things aren't going the way you planned with your home life or with your job, but you have one. Maybe you've forgotten the true value of what you actually have that's right there at home for you. Is there something about your life that you're not happy about? What are you doing about it? Ask yourself the question, is it worth fighting for? Is it? Let me come back to that question that I asked you earlier on. What does God want me to do with the situation that I find myself in? I'm glad that Christ valued each of us enough to fight for us, aren't you? I know that I will probably continue to disappoint him as I struggle with my very flawed character, but he is there at the beginning of every day and at the end of every day. All I need to do is to reach out to him. Ask him the questions that bother you. But when you ask him the questions, don't rush off. Take the time to open your eyes. Maybe God is showing you the answer and you just haven't seen it or recognised that it's right there in front of you. Pray and listen. I came across a reading that my mum had in a daily devotional book, and it's called My Utmost for His Highest, and it's written for December 31, which is for tomorrow. And it says this: security from yesterday. God requireth that which is past. At the end of the year, we turn with eagerness to all that God has for the future, and yet anxiety is apt to arise from remembering the yesterdays. Our present enjoyment of God's grace is apt to be checked by the memory of yesterday's sins and blunders. But God is the God of our yesterdays, and he allows the memory of them in order to turn the past into the ministry of spiritual culture for the future. God reminds us of the past lest we get into a shallow security in the present. He's also the security for tomorrow, for the Lord will go before you. This is a gracious revelation that God will garrison where we have failed to. He will watch lest things trip us up again and into failure, as they assuredly will, if he was not there as our reward. God's hand reaches back to the past and makes a clearinghouse for conscience. And then there is the security for today. For ye shall not go out with haste. As we go forth into the coming year, let it not be in the haste of impetuous, unremembering delight, nor with the flight of impulsive thoughtlessness, but with the patient power of knowing that the God of Israel will go before us. Our yesterdays present irreparable things our yesterdays present irreparable things to us. It is true that we have lost opportunities which will never return, but God can transform this destructive anxiety into the constructive thoughtfulness for the future. Let our past sleep on the bosom of Christ. Leave the irreparable past in his hands and step out into the irresistible future with him. They were great words. Second Timothy 4 verse 7 says this: I have fought the good fight and I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. It's my prayer that each of you, and myself included, makes this our New Year's resolution for 2024. God bless.